fastener as long as it's a finish nail or a regular nail. 1 inch minimum embed.
What gauge you recommend?
16 gauge minimum. Or if it's a nail, we actually specify it as a .113, and that's pretty common for a stick nail. A lot of the coil-sided nails are like 0.9. We're going to work on changing some of that so we're not catching people up. A lot of people are just going to use a coil-sided nail to put the trim on. Technically, it's not a big enough shank on it if you're trying to stay out of court.
And then would you, well, this talks about it, I was going to ask you, you recommend miter for button those joints on the corner?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let me back up here a little bit. So we show right in the Plycem trim instructions that you don't want a miter. It says shows a miter corner and a big, don't do it in that. So, but to, one of the main things, and I'll get to this here, did that answer your question?
Yeah, so bottom.
Bottom tight, way easier. Way easier to do that. So if you're going to be using it for fascia, you're going to need a sub barge because you need a fastener every 16 inches. And unless your rafters are at 16 inches, you're going to need something, a 2x nail or something minimum 1 inch. For the trim, you need to be into wood 1 inch versus the framing or the siding an inch or a quarter. So the minimum nail I could use on a 1 inch piece of trim, the length would be what?
1 inch.
1 inch trim, 1 inch embed.
2.5.
I'm no math whiz, but I think that's 2 inches. So this gets into cutting it. We actually say to use a carbide tip blade. It doesn't have silica in it. The carbide blades cut through it a little bit easier. Fastening, it's going to be a corrosion resistant fastener, either electro galvanized or stainless steel. Stainless steel for finished nails they're pretty flimsy. It's a softer metal, so if you're having problems driving it, then you might have to go to a regular, just a corrosion resistant nail. 113 shank with a 9/32 head, typically your coil siding nail or regular headed nail. Finished nails, 16 gauge minimum. I like the 15 gauge myself, especially stainless steel. They seem to shoot in there a little easier. Minimum 2 inch length because of the 1 inch.
Do you want the proud head on that as well?
Yeah, it's good. Well, with a finished nail, you need a little bit of a head on there. No, you can flush that out. It's thick enough that, yeah, 5/16 you can't do that. But with the trim, we don't show them countersunk, but it's pretty common to see those patched. The good thing about trim is there's no ICC documentation for it, so you could glue it on anything you want, as long as you're not coming for us for a warranty. If there's no codes that are associated with how it's
So they don't have
fastened.
anything like those
The tabs?
tabs?
No, that's just silly. That's crazy. But we could get them if you want. If there's a need and we need to do it, we'll go to the guy that's making the tabs and say, hey, us too, make some for us.
One for corners, I think.
Yeah. Well, in corners, and the only way
tab
to...
where they put the two pieces of trim this way and they have a tab, and then just then you can
It's a lot of work.
It eliminates face nails.
You're still face nailing, but yeah, that's the trick with pre-painted is the touch-up. So people want a piano-like finish, tabs are probably a good idea.
Right.
But I think they're loose. Personally, not for me. I can set my gun right, and with any kind of face nail, as long as it's symmetrical, it doesn't hurt your eyes. But if it's just like all over the place, it's like, ugh. If you make it look nice and know that it's going to be seen, as long as it's not blasted through, you're going to be okay. Even with pre-finish, it's really about setting your. If I was using pre-finish, I wouldn't want to countersunk. Primed, patch it all day.
Right.
So this is a real key part here, the clearances. So it's 1 inch from the sides and 2 inches from the end. So with that, you can't pre-build these corners. The reason being is that this product can take nails this way, but this way it tends to split it. So I can actually shoot nails into here and it won't affect it, but if I take the 4/4, I'll see it split. So, and knowing from when I actually got the job at Hardy, because I did a 100-house plat with their trim, and I tried making 2-piece corners 20 foot long, not so good. So I started with my sides, nail those on, and then I just run my next piece up to it. Staying 1 inch from the edge. But what you don't want to do is pre-build these corners that way. So there is a nailing schedule for it. 1 inch from the edges, 2 inches from the ends, and with anything I'd go 2 inches from the end. You don't put nails 1 inch from the end of wood trims. If the trim is less than 3.5, I can do a stagger pattern every 24 inches. If it's greater than 3.5 but smaller than 4, then you need a twin set of them every 16 inches. And if it's greater than basically your 8 inch, 10 inch, and 12 inch, you need 3 fasteners.
So your 5/4 and 4/4, you can go 24 inches on center?
If it's smaller than 3.5. I'm actually trying to change instructions to make it all 24 inches. I mean 16 inches, I think 24 inches is too far. With that said, if I'm nailing this 1x3 on, I don't need to put a twin set of fasteners every 16 inches. I mean, that's the beauty about this trim. For battens, if you have a board and batten job, do your best to talk them out of using whitewood or spruce. Whitewood or spruce cups and curls. And you're forced to have to caulk these in there to glue them in there with a fiber cement trim. Finish nails hold on. You don't see them, especially if you're going with smooth. It's going to stay where you put it. It's not going to want to walk off the wall. That's the beauty about the trims. So the trim is 5 inch or greater, 3 fasteners. So how close can I get to the edge on the trims?
2 inches. 1 inch, but you go 2 inches.
Right, so 2 inches from the ends,
2 inches from the end, 1 inch from the side.
1 inch from the edges. Excellent. Okay, any questions on what type of fasteners to use or how many you need? Excellent. Okay, trim installation. So if we get this question a lot, can I
Is
plant
that
the
in
trim?
this book?
Yeah.
It is?
So siding butted to trim or capping over siding. So this is a personal thing. If I'm using pre-painted, I'm capping all the trim on. Because I'm eliminating that caulking bead that's going to fade. No caulking in the field, that's great. But even with butt-to trims, this color match caulking on the sun side is going to fade. So I can eliminate that by making it fast for me, siding it and planting that trim. Super fast. It will last you 15 years. If you start caulking all those joints, you won't get 6 months before there's color changes. So people don't like that because it leaves that 5/16 gap there, but they're going to like that a lot better than having to re-caulk that and what it looks like after 15 years. Caulking will not keep its color. This is really important that you have this 1/8 inch gap. They did kind of a J pocket here. They run a sub little corner and then ran some of the 7/16 trim. If I'm going to go butt to and I don't want bugs in there, I'm going to run some sub corner and then put a skirt over it so I'm hiding that sealant so it stays the same color. Or I just plant the trim on, and for new construction, that's how I do it.
So the trim's going over the siding?
Yep. Either way.
That almost sits in like a J channel.
Yeah, so this is butt to here, and this is butt to here. So basically you trim first, leave an 1/8 of an inch and caulking it. Putting your cut ends into that trim, and that's my cut end treatment. I'm saying it's the best practice for painted product. You need to eliminate all the color match sealant you can to the exposure. Some people don't like that, and that's fine. They can run butt to trim and caulk it and re-caulk it every year after. If they want a no maintenance assembly, put the siding on there. They can seal that corner if they're worried about bugs. Plant, and you're going to end up with that 5/16 little shadow line there, but you're not going to have maintenance for 15 years or 100 years or 50 years, whatever the cost is. When you do that, is it on my next slide here? No. So when you do, if you do cap over the trim, we do show in our instructions that you need to nail it at the high point. Every 16 inches, don't nail in the void. Make sense? So why should I be concerned about bad wall preparation?
Is that one of your jobs that you've done?
Yeah, that's why they forced me to take this job.
All right.
So if you can't make it as a sider, you start teaching how to do it, right? I did okay. This is one of the things you could have been fixable. You can't fix this, but you can fix this. So if it's an S, and I use a little strip here and a little strip there, maybe I've got some strapping that's pooching stuff out, I just used to steal little ripping strips, and
Just firm it
you got to fur it out a little bit. Typically, whatever you do, it's going to do the opposite, but this could have been avoided. I mean, typically framers aren't spacing their plywood, so it's buckling every 4 feet. And when I saw that, I nicely go over to the framer and wake him up and then tell him he needs to space his plywood. And, you know, like our panels, it's not 48 inches, it's 47 and 7. So if you put everything tight, you run off frame. So I framed for more years than I sided, but this could have been fixed with some butt strips. Okay, door wavy. See, this could have been fixed with a little strong back there. You know, right now is not the time to fix it. You probably could fix that, because that's probably a flat stud in the gable. But 5/16 siding won't hide much. Yeah, that hurts my eyes. Siding installation. Okay, so cutting. We're going to be using that circular saw with a 7 1/4 polycrystalline diamond blade, or these shears, or that guillotine. I'm on a cut table here. What I don't want to do is cut through the wood with my blade, because they're $50 blades and they don't hold up well to cutting through wood. I've got some runners on here, so I'm not cutting through the wood. This is the plastic laminate on there. Try to keep that on there if you're using Color Max as long as you can. But if it becomes a pain in the butt, the only thing I really try to keep the plastic on is if I'm doing trims. Blind nailing, I don't need to touch up all the nails, where face nailing, I'm going to need that. And if you can keep the plastic on it, keeps you from, it's kind of like masking tape. It helps out a little bit. Typically with any face nail, you're going to probably have to put a couple coats on it. I put everything upside down, and that's because the way the blades rotate, it pulls through the finish versus out of the finish. And I'll show you that later if we have some time, the difference between cutting upside down with the shears, cutting upside down with these. Big difference. Another thing that I...
out. Do you want to cut upside down?
What's that?
You said you do want to cut upside down?
Oh yeah, all the time. And mostly because when you're cutting, you're raining dust down onto the face of the piece below it. So if you're working in the rain, and that thoroughly dries on there, whereas if it's cutting and the dust is on the back, it's no problem. Another reason why I do it, man, I want to do this, I guess, yeah, what the hell. So if I'm notching something out, if I cut this from the face, all I can do is come up to here, and what happens is I have to hog this out with a knife later. So this is, so we'll say this is a face, I cut in here, the blades are circular, so I might cut here, but I'm leaving all that material on the radius, whereas if I cut it on the back side, I can overcut it by a quarter, and it falls out. I'm not running the saw on finished material number 1, it's a smoother cut number 2, and I don't have to take my knife and clean out that little nib that's going to be left if I'm cutting anything on the face. It was my biggest pet peeve was seeing this curve, saw curve, crisscrossed on every notch. And you can fill with caulking, but it all shrinks in there later. It's one of those things you don't have to be a carpenter to know that they overcut it. So if you do it on the back side, it makes it a lot easier. Take care when you're cutting close to edges. Smaller pieces, you're going to have to make sure it's supported. If you have a piece that's less than, say, 1.5 inches, you need FM. And you know what FM is? Fucking magic. You can't nail fiber cement that's 3/4, 1 inch. 1.5 inches, maybe. Inch,
It's gonna break?
oh, it's gonna break every time. Maybe. 3/4, definitely. So, to avoid that, and I typically go that in the layout section. So that's the first thing I do is snap my line, go off my deck or I'm covering up my framing. I'll measure up to my windows to make sure I'm not having that 1/2 inch or 1 inch, and it's as simple, if it's a 1/2 inch, when I get back to my deal here, I just cheat that first one down. And then keep my same exposure so I'm not ending up with something that's impossible to fasten. And it's not always going to help you because window sills do change a little bit, but if I've got 4 windows right across the front of 40 apartment buildings I'm doing, I'm going to cheat that layout down without having to rip my bottom and not trying to piece in a little piece of siding. I've had to do it, and it basically caulking and tape and maybe a finished nail. I mean, it can be done, but it could be done better if you have a little planning as far as avoiding that pitfall, as it were, for siding. So we don't make any beaded siding, but if we did, you want to make sure you go through the bead first, because if you don't, it'll split out at the end. Okay. Keep going here. Okay, fastening. So nails, screws, and pins. So nails and screws can be used into wood. The pins are for metal framing only. And this is a bad picture of those of that ET&F, the Aerofast, ITW, JIT-Fast. It's the pneumatic fastening guns for metal framing. Just so you know. Siding nail, smooth shank, ring shank, roofing nail, rib bugle head screws. You know, I had an installer, or actually a dealer in Montana, saying that the poor installer had voided the warranty because he used ring shank nails. Guy tore it all off and put it back on. He didn't void the warranty. What he did was, the ring shank nails we only show for installing our fiber cement shingles and panels. And that's because you're just attaching to OSB. As a rule, if I had a choice, I'd rather use a smooth shank nail because it doesn't tend to want to drag the material out with it. Using a ring shank isn't going to void your warranty. The warranty has nothing to do with how it's fastened. Okay, so roofing nails, remember that's 1 3/4 max for shooting out of a gun, so if you have any kind of gypsum or foam on there, you basically can't use a roofing nail. If it's straight to the wall, roofing nails will work. Typically, most of the siding nails we start at 2 inches. 1 1/4 plus the 5/16 is going to give you your 1 9/16 minimum. Plastic collated versus wire collated. So this is a plastic collated. There is a difference. The wire collated is very hard on your eyes. The maze nails you get, because they're a double hot dipped, they use a plastic collation. They're a little tougher to feed through the gun, but if I had a preference, we would want you to use a plastic collation because the wire gets stuck on the wire collated and can rust and poke your thumb quite a bit. So stainless steel, if required by code, we only require that it be electro galvanized minimum. It's got to be corrosion resistant. So we don't even say EG, it just says corrosion resistance. We would hope that you would use better. We do recommend a double hot dip nail versus the EG nail. Stainless steel, if required by code. As you can see, we show the electro galvanized EG allowed but not recommended. So not approved for siding installation. This isn't because they wouldn't work, it's because they've never been tested. We can't promote an assembly unless we've put it through its paces. 5 1/4 to 12 inch, all our panel. Don't use staples, don't use a D-head nail, a pass-load nail, a clip nail, your early version of pneumatic fasteners. Finish nails only for trim. You can use finish nails to tune up some poor installation, but you don't want to use a finish nail to hang in or glue fiber cement on. Any questions about the fasteners? Okay. So this is kind of a little condensed version of our ICC ES ESR 1668. Every manufacturer that makes a product has to have testing to make sure that it's not going to blow off and hurt anybody. In that manual, we'll show the product, and this is kind of condensed. If we'd have vertical siding all by itself, starting at 5 1/4 to 12. It's going to show you the fastener that's been tested, whether it was for panel, it'll tell you your edge and field fastening. For lap siding, it's going to say whether it was blind nailed or face nailed. Blind nail 1 inch down, face nailed 3/4 inch up. And we do the 3/4 inch up because remember, can only be no closer than 3/8 to the edge of a fiber cement panel. 3/4 inch, 1 1/4 overlap, it still gives you that 3/8, ½ inch clearance around that nail so it doesn't crack out. This is a little bit different. Our new ICC report says basically the product nail, where it was nailed, and it'll give you a win category and a speed, and it'll say okay or not okay. Super easy to read. So if you know the wind category and the speed that you need, the allowable wind pressure that you need to meet, it'll say okay or not okay. If we don't meet it, you need to find a fastener that does. And this is really not for us as the siding inspectors. This is for your local code inspectors. They dictate all that. Now, if we could determine that it blew off because they used an 1 3/4 inch nail and it caused it to fall off, then that's a different story. But for the most part, this is something that would be policed by your local inspector or a customer rep or somebody trying to get out of trying to get paid. So fastening the framing is preferred. You can go to plywood, but nails tend to walk out. They don't cinch up very well. You can apply directly to 7/16 OSB by itself, but it's hard to get a good cinch. They kind of bounce on the wall. We have it in there because we have assemblies for SIPS walls, a structural insulated panel system, basically OSB and foam in between. If you're going through non-structural sheathing and it's fairly soft, you might have to pre-drill on your smaller pieces because of that flex. It has a tendency to want to crack, especially if you're using like a ring shank nail where it's really dragging the product through it. Fastener placement. For lap, you can go face nail or blind nail. Blind nail is going to be pretty much the standard way you install products unless you're using 9 1/4 or 12-inch lap. 12-inch lap, you're going to have to face nail almost every day. 9 1/4, depending where you're at. You can get away with blind nailing if you do everything just so. Flush versus counter, sunk or angled. So we're showing proud, and that's the reason why we have that little knife. So I don't have to pry any siding. I can just, it's always, if you're there, it's probably loose enough that you can take a look at it. I look for flush, especially counter sunk. 5/16 material, you cannot countersink. It pushes itself through itself, makes it mush. So if you're flush, already will let you do that. This amount of material got pushed all the way through the product. It doesn't compress. It doesn't suck it up. It pushes it out the back. So we show that. Another thing I see a lot is the guy will have it up on the wall and he's doing panels specifically and just start smacking on the nail. That's basically just taking a pile driver and pushing it through the product. To do it correctly, you need to cinch the product with your hand and snug the nail up to it. You're not using the fastener to cinch it up, you're cinching it up because it's a hard product. If you smack on it, you're just going to blast it out. So people that are having problems with panel, it's because they're just using their hammer to cinch it up. You need to put it where it's supposed to go and then snug the nail. If you do that, you'll get 50 years out. If you don't, you're gonna start.
Why are they face nailing on that side? I mean, is there just a difference, or why would someone face nail a blind nail on a 8 1/4 board?
Maybe the Carolinas. I've seen people glue it on and screw it on. 8 1/4. If you do, it's like 140 miles an hour. I mean, if you hit framing and don't high nail and don't drive the nail through, it's not going anywhere. You're always going to have a combination of face nail and blind nail in every house. You've got a face nail all underneath your windows.
Right.
You've got a face nail your last course. So
no, but in a visual area, I mean, you just see.
Right. So if you're doing a crappy job and fixing it by putting a bunch of face nails in it, you're not doing a very good job.
Right.
So I see a lot of people, they'll pin down each one of the joints. And if you do anything in your tenure here, try to talk people out of doing that. Unless they're using 12-inch or 9 1/4 and face nail and everything, really try to talk them out of pinning those joints because the combination between the blind nail and face nail, those are going to crack. 7, 8 years, you're going to crack. I don't care whose product you're using. Hardy's, Nietzsche, Certainty, Building Smooth Law. And if you leave that weak point on there, there's a good chance it might not crack, but there's a good chance it will. So if you don't put a nail there, guess what? It won't crack. And then I'll go over a little bit of what to do for aesthetic pin back. So everybody got that 3/4 of an inch up. The reason why we do that is because if you were 3/4 inch, quarter, it leaves you still some meat on that board below it, so you're not blasting out the product below it or behind it. 1 inch down, we give no slack. We used to say 3/4 to 1 inch. Now it says 1 inch. So if you've got somebody, what do I have with me? Let's see here. pull it out of there. So you got your homeowner. Oh, we got a problem. You gotta tear it all off. That's all it takes. It's one of those measurable things that you don't need to be a journeyman carpenter to know that it's not 1 inch. These are pretty sweet. You guys should all get one of these Allura for the job sites. So all the measurable stuff, face nailing, blind nailing, it's all about placement. No closer than 3/8. You can be farther and away, but no closer. 1 inch down and 3/4 of an inch up. If you have a problem and they are where we tell you to put it, we're going to honor that warranty. Unless we can tell that every house on that block cracked because they were built on a hillside and it was a structural thing. We do what we can, but the product can only stretch and bend so much before it breaks. This is showing what you don't want to do as far as the static pin back or nailing that trim on. You don't want to be in this void here. So what can happen if it's got that space behind there? It allows it a way for that product to blast out the back. If it's up tight, anybody smacked on some of the sledgehammer? Without backing on it, it goes with it. So if it's up tight, you're good. Any questions about not toenailing the product or not flushing out? That is the key difference between us and them. They've done their testing with flush. All of our testing's been proud. It really boils all back down to that third-party ICC testing as far as true code. So if they want it to last 50 years, they probably should have the nails proud. Weather-resistant barrier. Now if you're in Timbuktu and they don't require weather-resistant barrier, we don't either. So it's not going to void your warranties if it's not required by code there, but pretty much anywhere it is nowadays. Any questions about blind nailing or flush nailing? So Hardy recommends using a finish nail for aesthetic tuning. Me personally, if there's enough pressure on that board to pop out the joint or to make it move, you probably should use a headed nail if you want it to last 50 years. Now finish nail is going to get you through, you know, the year or month you're on the plot to get paid, but if you want to be well put together, you need a headed nail on it to keep anything cinched down over time. Okay, so we've got correct and incorrect, high nailed, not into framing. Are you guys currently having to use insulation foam in your area? Not you, but you? Yeah, so the trick with that is no greater than 1 inch, anything greater than 1 inch, and then they're on their own. Basically, if it's greater than 1 inch non-structural, they have to reestablish the wall assembly with either 1x4 batten strips, an 1.25 inch nail, or a 2x strip every 16 inches. And hi Donna.
Hi.
Okay, fastening wood studs. Structural and non-structural sheathings impact the length of the fastener. So if I have structural sheathing, it can be considered part of that embed. 1.25 inch penetration for the nails, 3/4 inch penetration for screws. So a little better holding power, a little less embed needed. If you're going to use a screw, it's got to be a corrosion resistant bugle head or wafer head, a number 8 or number 9, anything equal or greater, nothing less. So if they want to use a 16D, you know, obviously it's going to hold better than a 2D or a 6D, but we don't show it in the testing. So when you get people wanting to do something that's not in the book, you say, never seen it, we've never tested it, you're on your own. We don't have any documentation that'll back it up, and we can't write you a letter saying that that's okay. We're going to get a ton of people asking you guys to write letters. We don't do that. If you have that conversation, it's all verbal. Yeah, it's a free country, but you know, if you want us to back you up that, and you want your warranties to be ironclad, you need to follow our instructions and follow the code-approved fastener schedule. And then you want to say, well, it'll work. I'm not a building designer. I'm not an architect. I'm not a building code guy. This is the testing we have. You know, figure it out.
America.
It's America. Now we're trying to get a little closer to that, but there's a line between manufacturing and the usage that we won't cross. We warrant the board, not the assembly. So if you use fastening the metal studs, I would recommend that you use a rib bugle head screw. Okay, grab. Let's see what's in this box here. You can pass this around. I've got an assortment of stuff in here. This is a wafer head screw. I like the wafer head because it doesn't embed so far into the 5/16. As long as it's ribbed, it's corrosion resistant, and you either get 3 threads into the framing or a 1/4 inch. That's how we've dictated the fastener embed. And then the pins are that ballistic pin, 1/4 inch minimum for that as well. Why is proper fastening and proper fastening choice important?
Shit happens.
Yeah, I can definitely tell that they missed a few nails here. A butt strip here, and it'd be good. If you install siding correctly, you will never see these gaps. They've either high nailed, overdriven the fastener, or haven't hit studs.
So what are they gonna do then?
Face nail to hell.
Right.
Making sure they're 3/4 of an inch up.
Draw
Nope.
it in.
What's that?
And draw it
Yep. And the trick with that is
in. Without breaking it.
yeah, you've got to make sure. So when I'm face nailing, and there's going to be times where I'm going to have to do that. This is a butt joint here. I typically don't need to nail in the framing to get that to lay down. I typically can go to a stud 16 inches over and get that to lay down. What I don't want to do is get real close to that corner, because in the 50-year span of this, there's a good chance it could crack out. But if you put the nail a stud over, you're not right on that weak point of the board. You're not on that corner. If you do need to do that, so I'll start, if I'm tuning something up, I'd probably start right here, try to find a stud in this area and hit it. And then if it would come to a joint and that didn't work, I'm not going to get any closer than 2 inches to that corner. And I'm using that, we haven't tested that way, but if you use our vertical panel, you can't be any closer than 2 inches to this corner. So 3/8 from your edge. But when you go to nail it, 2 inches over, 2 inches up, 2 inches up. Hardy's got the same requirement. 3/8 minimum. Now if you're nailing on our easy trim, they're actually saying you need to be 6 inches away from it. And there's a good reason for that. Who's familiar with the easy trim system? It's more of a commercial setup. They have manufacturing. We actually list all of them in the instructions there. Fry Regular is the most known piece. Tamlin, Easy Trim, Extreme Trim. One of the reasons why we want them to do that is because of this easy bump. Everybody see that? So if I was to put my panel in here, and the reason being is that easy bump helps push that profile tight here. They say it helps with a little bit of a rain drain, little rain plane here. But the problem is if I'm all tight and I put a nail here, there's a good chance I'm going to crack that out. So if I'm using nails, vertical panel, I need a nail every 6 inches. I'm going to keep those nails 6 inches from this easy bump, keeping that same perimeter. Nail every 6 inches, and then 12 inches in the field. I want to get